Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. I do appreciate you tuning in as always. Now let's review Detroit Become Human. Another one of those David Cage's interactive movies. Or is it a game? Well, that is the ongoing discussion among players. Fact is that Cage has carved out this niche for himself somewhere between a movie and a game. Now in the near future, androids have advanced so much that they are integral part of society for better or worse, and most they serve as, well, servants, as slaves so to speak, but not for long, hence the title. Story is told through the lives of various androids, and it is a way more mature and grim story than any of the previous games of David Cage was. And that is a good thing, because the previous game, Beyond Two Souls, was kind of a coming-of-age story, and I felt nothing for that story. Although Detroit does try to drive home the point that almost every human in the story is very flawed, either having a drinking problem or drug problem or an abusive tendency. I mean, it's just a little bit over the top. But I do like the fact that this game has a brisk pace in telling the story, and it is less overindulging as the previous games. And every game of David Cage is a step up in production values, and Detroit is not an exception there. Visuals look stunning. Androids look lifelike, but not so much that they are humans. They still have this sort of eerie look to them. And the animations are just top-notch. The music, the voices, it's all very well done. A lot of it's window dressing, of course, because every chapter consists of this confined area in which the events take place, and there's a lot of invisible borders. Much like in previous games, there isn't a whole lot to do in terms of, well, interactivity with the environments. Many of the things that you actually do early on are quite mundane, using the right analog stick for picking things up or opening doors, and there's some context-sensitive button pressing sections in this game that we've seen before in the earlier games. It is a real paradox, though, that for a game that prouds itself for having a lot of choices and consequences, and you do have those, it also forces the player to do that mundane stuff, just to set the story up. I'm not sure if there's another way of doing things, but I guess you need the mundane stuff just to get the story going. And I especially liked the police investigations where you need to find clues and reconstruct a crime scene and sort of rewind the events that took place there, so you get a clear picture of what happened. And yes, there are choices with consequences, way more than in the previous games, like Beyond Two Souls or the other one, I don't know, the police story. So in that aspect, it really is a game. There are choices and consequences. Paths do branch, as you can tell from the flow chart that you'll see after every sort of episode that you play. Now, there are some problems with the choices. Now, first, in order to actually have meaningful choices, one has to recognize them. And many a time I finished a segment, and only afterwards, by reading the flow chart, I saw that there were roads not taken, which I was not aware of. Now, they could have been hidden in dialogue choices, or when you fail a certain quick time section, because I wasn't good at that, or I just failed it. So the game doesn't really signal that there are choices to be made. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Also, especially during your first playthrough, you cannot foresee any consequences of your choices. Even if you wanted to make a meaningful and conscious decision or choice, like for instance, going a peaceful route or a violent route, the effects feel random at times, reminding you that this in fact is a movie. And you get the consequences that are not really yours or based on your choices, but David Cage's consequences, because he made the movie. They are his choices and his consequences, and I'm playing through them, basically. Thirdly, there is always an optimal way of progressing. Like, take the investigation segment for instance. A different outcome of the investigation would occur if I deliberately failed it, which you can, but most gamers will try and get it right. Most gamers will try and save the girl and the android, instead of letting the investigator catch up with them. He will catch up to a certain point anyway, because that's how the story goes, as David Cage intended it to go. And there you have it. It's a real paradox. Choices and consequences are there, but not entirely yours. So sometimes the game feels somewhat cheap. It sort of pulls the rug under your feet, which is nice if you're watching a movie, but it's not always nice if you're presented with choices that, well, in hindsight, are not real choices. But moving on. You can, of course, replay the whole thing to see another outcome, and I think it is worth it to do it. Personally, it doesn't make sense to play the whole thing again and just to try and fail a certain section just to see what would have happened, but you can. And there are some surprising results if you do. Much like with the movie, once you've sort of finished it, you'll probably move on to do something else and forget about it. It's how I felt about Detroit. Because otherwise I would be spending another 10 hours to plow through the whole thing, which for me doesn't make a lot of sense. I can live with the choices I made and the outcome that I reached at the end. Why would I deliberately, again, choose differently just to see a different cutscene? I guess that's just me. I think overall it's David Cage's best effort to date. It has a more focused, mature story that looks and sounds great and has more potential paths to take than any of the previous games, which is an achievement in itself. But just don't expect a sort of choose-your-own-adventure type of game, because it's not quite there yet. So yeah, I do think it is recommended to play through it at least once, and if you're really inspired, do it twice. But yeah, that's what I think of Detroit. Let me know what you think. Leave comments, subscribe. I do appreciate that. See you next time.
And without knowing why, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I strangled him and I ran away. There, now you know everything.